position is $5.7 billion. I think he's staying on that. But to tell you the truth, I think there is, my opinion, a meeting somewhere in the middle. But Nancy Pelosi has to come off of zero. She stays at zero. Really, this is on Nancy Pelosi keeping the government shut because she's not willing to negotiate or compromise.
A conservative activist says a recent demonstration in California highlights the hypocrisy of the left's position on border walls. Chad Groening has more.
On Monday, conservative activist Laura Loomer hopped over the fence surrounding Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's estate in California to build a, quote, caravan sanctuary for people she claimed were illegal immigrants. She said that Pelosi is a very rich Democrat, and she believes that everyone is welcome here, and sanctuary is a human right. Then the police showed up and told her she was trespassing on private property and wanted some ID.
Gavin Newsom said we didn't need driver's licenses because it's like a form of profiling.
Well,
I'm just
we
really
do.
confused.
You're on private property, so you're trespassing.
I'm really confused. Nancy said everyone was welcome here. Nancy Pelosi said asylum's a human right, but now they're saying I'm trespassing, and Nancy said everyone is welcome here. What's private property? Is that kind of like crossing over the border? But what happens if you cross over the border? Is that trespassing?
Gary Bauer of American Values.
The demonstrators were highlighting the hypocrisy of the left's positions on things like security and walls and so forth.
And Bauer says Pelosi and Senator Chuck Schumer showed some more hypocrisy when some mothers whose children were killed by illegals showed up.
And in both cases, Pelosi and Schumer hid behind the walls of their offices with the security that the American taxpayer provides for those offices and would not meet for the mothers who have been permanently separated from their children because of deadly violence by illegal immigrants.
I'm Chad Groening.
An Alabama man is in custody for allegedly torturing young children, shutting them in laundry machines and switching them on. Eben Brown reports.
Children younger than 6 say a man they lived with in Alabama repeatedly stuffed them into the washer and dryer, turning on the machines and taunting them by telling how hot the water would get. Now 25-year-old Stephen Garrett Todhunter from the town of Alabaster, south of Birmingham, is under arrest.
It's painful. Sometimes we see things in this line of work that nobody should have to see. And when someone hurts a child, it hurts me as a father, and it hurts me as an investigator to have to deal with these cases.
Police Detective Paul Johnson, it's not known if Todhunter is the children's father. Eben Brown, Fox News.
There is new talk of a second summit between President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Greg Palcott has more.
Heading to Washington right now, Kim's right-hand man and top nuclear negotiator, Ri Yong-chol. He is set to meet Friday with Secretary of State Pompeo. Reportedly, he is carrying yet another letter from Kim to Trump. His visit to D.C. last year paved the way for the summit of Trump and Kim in Singapore. There is new talk that a possible second summit could take place in Vietnam. This comes amid tough times for U.S.-North Korean relations. Kim Jong-un still says he is committed to denuclearization, but he is adding demands of the U.S., calling for an easing of sanctions and a pullback of U.S. military personnel and hardware from the region. President Trump has been tweeting and saying in recent months that things are going well between the two countries, but analysts say a diplomatic kickstart wouldn't hurt. In London, Greg Palcott, Fox News.
And U.S. long-term mortgage rates held steady this week. Mortgage buyer Freddie Mac says the average rate on the benchmark 30-year fixed-rate mortgage was unchanged from last week at 4.45%. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Chris Brooks. A lot of parents raised their kids in church and did, in kind of scare quotes, everything right. And now they're looking at junior or sis or their son or daughter who's walked away from the faith and said, your God is not my God. And they're wanting to know, what do we do to reach them?
Tuned in to Equipped, weekday afternoons at 12 Central on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Karen Pence is the wife of the vice president. She's teaching art at a place where the application requires would-be employees to initial next to a list of beliefs, including certain moral misconduct.
Congress is the only one that can fund the border. Congress is the only one that can open up government. They need to go do their job. And think about it, they're talking about doing a recess. If in my business life, I'd say if we have a problem, we're all staying here until we get it resolved.
And now, Stacey Washington.
Welcome to the program. We have so much for you. First off, we are going to be talking with, we have the best guest today. We have Brandon Darby from Breitbart News, and he's so amazing. I haven't talked to him in quite a while. I know Brandon Darby from my old CPAC days, way back in 2012. That's when I met him, sitting in one of the big conference rooms, and another radio host at the time was doing her program, and we were sitting listening to it live, and he and I just struck up a conversation. I remember thinking to myself how amazing it was that he would be so young and have such an amazing heart for trafficking victims. And he's been doing that work since then. I mean, he's been nonstop. So whether it's been fame or fortune or whatever he's been working on, he has never lost his central focus on freeing people who are enslaved. And mainly we're talking about women and children here. And so he's been doing this work for really just consistently, working in that field and helping women, young girls, little boys, whoever is a victim, no matter their nationality, no matter anything that they've been going through. So one of the things that I want to do today is get his take on what's happening at the southern border and talk to him about some of the things that can be done, whether it's congressionally or in the realm of activism on our part. All of these things, there are things we can do. And so I'm so excited to have the opportunity to chat with him today. We are also going to be delving into a number of different things. We're going to be taking your calls. We are also going to talk about Nordstrom. Their stock is down. You probably heard the story about Second Lady Karen Pence. Apparently, working at a Christian school is verboten, no longer allowed. And these schools exist all over the country. Thousands of them, probably tens of thousands of them, I'd say. Millions of American children are taught in buildings where the traditional social mores, shocking as they may be, are still the order of the day. So we're going to be delving into that. Nordstrom, their stock is down. They are on the kind of moderately naughty list for American Family Association. I'm going to draw a connection for you on that. And we're going to talk about that Gillette commercial and the connection of the Gillette commercial to the Me Too movement and the connection between Christian morality. And it's almost like they're on a balancing scale. The less Christianity and morality we see in public life, the more of the Me Too type stuff we see, and the more we need companies to step out of their traditional role of producing products for people to buy and into the role of finger wagging, kind of, you shouldn't do that type organizations. Who wants to hear from Gillette on morality? Not me. So we're going to talk about that. First off, I want to get into, and call lines are open, 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. First thing I want to do for today is get into our daily confession, which starts off for today. It's a Bible verse that I stumbled across during a time where I'd had some like viral video happen, and I had a ton of negative feedback from that viral video. There was a ton of awesome feedback, so it wasn't a negative experience in any case, but it was one of those situations where when something goes viral, you find out just how many people disagree with your opinions. And it really is irrelevant. Obviously, most people would say that what some stranger, 800 miles away thinks about your opinions is irrelevant. But in this point, I was getting not just tweets and things like that, because you can always just log out of Twitter and you're done. I'm talking about emails and people who would chase me from site to site. So if I blocked them on YouTube, they'd find me on Facebook, or so they'd go from place to place. They'd comment on my blog. If their IP address was blocked, they'd move on. And I was surprised by the virulent nature of the hateful comments. It was as if, these people were thinking, because you've had this opinion, some of them would say, you should be dead, you should die, you can't have this opinion. And during this time, I remember going to my Bible and thinking, I'm kind of annoyed here, but I'm also, I need some encouragement. And I stumbled across this scripture. It's John 5:41. So this is New Testament. And this is Jesus talking about, it's amazing to me. He's talking about the approval of others. Now, first things first, I am not comparing myself to Jesus. But I am saying that when we look in the Bible and we see, let's say, a scripture, and it can pertain to the situation that we're currently in, we can take heart in emulating the actions of our Lord and Savior. So in this scripture, and the New International Version, I'll give you a few other versions. John 5:41, it says, I do not accept glory from human beings. New Living Translation is, your approval means nothing to me. English Standard Version, I do not receive glory from people. Berean Study Bible, I do not accept glory from men. And the next verse, chapter 5, verse 42, is, but I know you, that you do not have the love of God within you. So Jesus is telling these people, so you don't approve, so what? And I remembered reading it, and it was as if little explosions of like fireworks were going off. And I had to put the negative response to what I'd sent out into perspective. And I think it's a lesson we all need to plug into, because there are always going to be naysayers and people who disapprove of what you're doing. Now, we have to draw a dividing line here. If I'm doing something wrong or immoral, if I'm breaking the law, if I'm breaking God's law, if I'm going against what God's word says, then the disapproval of others is appropriate, and it should be something that triggers a response in me, namely change in attitude and behavior, repentance, and turning away from the sin. So this does not justify sin. It does not justify holding a sinful position. You cannot take John 5:41 through 42 and say, well, you know what? I just don't have any caring about your dislike of abortion. Now you're going against the Bible. Now you're taking one Bible verse to refute what numerous other Bible verses say. That's not how this thing works. But if you're truly concerned with behaving in a way that glorifies God, it's not a flippant attitude as if to say, you know, you can go kill yourself, because that's the response some people have when they get tweeted, kill yourself, then they'll tweet back, no, you kill yourself. And that's, you know, that's smart alecky and it's catty and it's the internet. But the proper attitude is, first of all, I am not concerned with what you're concerned with, which is you're just triggered by what I've said because the truth hurts. I'm more concerned about your soul and your state of salvation and whether or not you're going to be in the place you want to be in eternity. So the difference of opinion goes further than just, I hate what you said, and me saying back, yeah, well, you know, whatever. So John 5:43, New International Version, I have come in my Father's name and you do not accept me. But if someone else comes in his own name, you will accept him. Now, this harkens back. Yesterday, we talked a little bit at the end of the show about Lauren Daigle and a lot of the contemporary Christian artists where they kind of bring glory to their own name as opposed to bringing glory to God, and how that is evidenced by the fact that they go mainstream and then they begin to refute the Bible or to say they don't understand the Bible or they're not sure what the Bible says on this or that hot button social issue. And then they go so far as to say, well, I'm not actually strictly a Christian artist. In other words, stop holding me to those standards. Stop asking me about that. I just want to make music and make money. And I just want you to pay attention to me, my followers, my this, my that. And I'm not castigating these people because I don't enjoy their music. On the contrary, I do. I enjoy their music. And I was sharing yesterday, that was simply sharing what the author wrote for us to think about. It bears thinking and introspection when we're talking about the music or when we're talking about, you know, hateful followers on Twitter or Instagram or wherever, or if we're just talking about our interactions with each other. But Jesus set forward an example. He says, I come in my Father's name and you do not receive me. Elsewhere in the Bible, he told the disciples to shake the dust from their feet when they go into a town and the town doesn't receive them. And so he says, you know, go where you're received and spread the gospel. But if they won't receive it, shake the dust off and move on. So keep doing the work that you're going to do. And I guess all of this is to share and clarify. First of all, that's where this kind of, it's a strange resolve that people keep marveling at. And you know, the comments from people who don't like what I'm saying is, you just don't seem to get it. I do get it. And I have taken the time to consider where I'm coming from. And I'm not saying this because I'm fantastic or because I'm so great. I'm saying this is not something that I'm paid, quote fingers, to say. Yes, I get paid for the work that I do, but it's not, they first said, will you say this? And I said, sure. And then they're like, okay, we'll pay you. It's more like I'm saying this and then the work comes. And it's that way for most successful people. You start doing the work and then the extra work comes after that once you're already entrenched in doing a good job. And so it's not about me. That is the thing that I think is the most important for me to take from this. Jesus Christ came to earth to disciple others, to first to free us from the sin debt that we all owe. Second, to give us an alternative from an eternity separated from the presence of God. And lastly, to enable us to enjoy life to the fullest, abundantly, with joy in the face of any obstacles or circumstances. Therefore, it doesn't matter what host you're listening to on Christian radio, if they're presenting the gospel, Jesus Christ crucified, and bringing the truth to you, it's not about that host. It's not about me. So you're listening to the show. Yes, it's Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk all over the country, 32 states, 800 communities. Woohoo! Awesome. But it's about the truth. And I'm trying to get that Christian worldview out there and the truth about what's happening in our country because it's a decline. And that brings us into our first subject today, which is, you got these liberals all over, liberals, Democrats, leftists, progressives, whatever label floats your boat, ripping into Second Lady Karen Pence because she's decided to go back to doing part-time work at a Christian school. And the Christian school that she's going to work at happens to have what most Christian schools have. You cannot go work at a Christian school and be in a same-sex relationship, be living adulterously, live cohabitating with someone that's not your spouse. I mean, you just can't be openly in opposition to what the Bible says in your personal life. And so you have to sign a statement of faith affirming that you agree with the Bible is true. And usually they're pretty similar across the board. And denominationally, they kind of skew to what denominations have as their creed, And they all say, all of the traditional ones, the Bible-based ones, will say that the Bible is the Word of God. It's the true and inerrant Word of God. That's a triune God, 3 persons in one. And it's basic theology here. And so she's going to go teach at this art school where she's taught previously, and everyone's angry because it has a traditional statement of faith. Now listen, people wouldn't be so angry if they knew what we Christians believed. That's why we have to get out and tell them. That's what I'm doing here. So when people are tuning in and getting angry, it's because they haven't been exposed. How can you be an American and not know what basic Christian doctrine is? We're going to find this more and more often because the millennials, the current crop of adults that are coming into power, they're the most unchurched generation. And the ones behind them, the one my kids are in, are going to be more unchurched than they are. So we're going to be running into a lot of people. When you say marriage is between one man and one woman and there are 2 genders, these people are literally going to kirk out on you. Like Captain Kirk used to go crazy on the aliens. That's a phrase created by my sister, and I use it all the time. I'm telling you, the freakouts will only increase. And that's why you have to be firm in what you believe. As Karen Pence says, she loves teaching art. She's going to go teach art to kids. She doesn't care what these people say, and she shouldn't. The approval that she is seeking doesn't come from man. My approval doesn't come from man. I want to put on a good program, but I'm not looking for approval here. Not from haters, it doesn't matter where it's coming from. The example set forth in Scripture shows that we should be working to please God. When we get back, we're going to have Brandon Darby with us. Stay right there.
The Ministry of Preborn meets abortion-minded women right where they are. When a young mom sees her baby on ultrasound, she's 80% more likely to keep her baby.
And I got to hear and see my baby for the first time. Hearing the heartbeat made me cry. And it was certain that I was going to keep my baby forever.
This mom chose life for her baby.
She's been such a joy. Her name even means rebirth and sort of being raised up from the ashes. I now see my daughter, and I cannot imagine my life without my happy, lovely, joyful, smart baby, and I'm so grateful.
Preborn runs and leads Christian pregnancy centers all over the country. To find out more, go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Your love can save a life.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a legacy moment. My Uncle Henry lived with us from the time I was born until I went off to college. When I was 13 and a half years old, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. At that time, Henry was somewhat hostile to the things of the Lord. He loved me, but he'd sometimes poke fun at me and Christianity in general. Well, Henry became very sick with cancer, and he went to the hospital. It happened that a minister stopped in to visit my uncle. Unbeknownst to any of us, God had been softening Henry's heart, using cancer to get his attention. The minister shared the gospel with him. Henry surrendered his life to Jesus Christ, went on to live several more years, and became a tremendous witness for Jesus Christ. God specializes in turning around apparently difficult, impossible situations in people. Think of the conversion of the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 9. Paul was not just an unbeliever. He was a hostile enemy of the cross. In fact, he was on his way to go get some Christians to kill them. Listen to Acts chapter 9, verse 3. Now as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. And falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do. Jesus intercepted him, and Saul became the Apostle Paul. And some have said that he became the greatest follower of Christ who ever lived. Here's what I want you to remember today. Keep praying for those who are hostile to the gospel. Who knows? There may be another Apostle Paul out there.
More information about the ministry of Crawford Loritz can be found online at livingalegacy.org.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. You can find out more about what we're doing at American Family Radio at afr.net or urbanfamilytalk.com. And stacyontheright.com is my website where you can subscribe. And right now it's my pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. We have Brandon Darby. He's the director of Border and Cartel Chronicles Project for Breitbart News. Brandon, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. I'm so torn up about the truth that's coming out about what's happening at the border. You've been telling that truth for a very long time, and it's only now coming to full light. The president has now taken the time to explain women being kidnapped and thrown into the trunks of cars. We've seen the stories, not so mainstream, but we've seen them definitely on Breitbart, about people being packed into the back of semis and suffocating on the trip through the entry points, and 16, 19 dozens of bodies being found in the back of these semis, sometimes little children in there as well. And this is something that could be rectified if we would simply address our southern border. What is your work showing you on that front?
Well, like you said, we've been doing this for a very long time. I started really focusing on the border shortly after Andrew Breitbart passed away. And we've been covering it for a very long time. So I think the big things that people need to keep in mind before any conversation is that, the border is roughly 2,000 miles, the southwest border. It has 9 sectors according to how our government and Border Patrol lays it out. And all of those 9 sectors are dealing with something different. Usually multiple stations in those sectors are dealing with different topography, different geography, different criminal groups, those different criminal groups we call cartels have different ways that they do business, different operating procedures, different personalities. And then when we go into Mexico, which is something that we do as well, all of that area along the border that is also part of the border region, right? It isn't just the U.S. side; it's also the Mexican side, and that's where the real problems are, the really heavy problems. Depending on the cartel that's in control of that section, right, of the border, some of them kill journalists, some of them don't kill journalists, some of them make as much or more from illegal immigration and from our asylum system as they do from narcotics. Others just focus on narcotics. And so all of these problems together and all of these factors really have to be considered and weighed when we're talking about the border. And that's just not something that a lot of people are doing right now. They're not really acknowledging the nuance and the differences. They're just talking about the border because it's, I think, the latest story to come up that that people care about right now. And for us, we do see the nuance and we do see the differences, and we see that most people aren't discussing those.
So let's kind of make this a little more real here. So the information that you're sharing may be news to some, but for people who've been paying attention, we all know that these different drug cartels, America is their primary source of income, and they've only branched out because they've seen opportunities to do so. A wall at our southern border, it kind of gets, I hate the way it's discussed. It's as if we're talking about walling in my yard, which it has, contiguous sides, and there's no way of, there's nothing to prevent, like boulders or rocks, or there's no river running through it. If I wanted to wall our yard in completely, it would actually be a rectangle, and I could do it and put a gate in to drive cars through, and I could completely wall it off. Our southern border is not like that, but the discussion around the wall has been, I don't know, it's been mutated into something crazy that ignores the truth of the matter, which is that there are these big, wide open stretches. It's desert territory, so it's dangerous, but drug cartels that have billions of dollars on the line don't care about that. They're penetrating the country through these wide open spaces that are not only unguarded but have no barrier, right?
Well, in part, yes, in part. So some of them, again, I mean, if we're looking at, when we're dealing with the Rio Grande Valley sector, right, and that's southern Texas along the Gulf of Mexico. That's the easternmost portion of the southwest border. From the Gulf of Mexico to about Zapata, Texas, that is Gulf cartel territory. Now, if you break it down further, from the Gulf of Mexico to about halfway to McAllen, Texas, that is the Matamoros faction of the Gulf cartel, and they're in conflict and at war with the Reynosa faction of the Gulf cartel, which is the dominant faction. We could just break it down if we went through all 9 sectors in which criminal groups control those sectors and what those criminal groups do. So those groups tend to enjoy and exploit an open border, or an unsecured border is an actually more accurate way to say it. Those groups tend to do that. But if we were to go to the far side of the U.S.-Mexico border, which would be south of San Diego, San Isidro, right, along the Pacific, north of Tijuana, those groups tend to not use the border. The only people crossing the border illicitly there are people who are coming in illegally. There's not very many of them there in relation to what we see in Texas and the Rio Grande Valley sector. Those groups tend to get most of their drugs through ports of entry, whether it be train or whether it be legitimate ports of entry in vehicles and on people. They tend to use ultralight vehicles. They tend to use tunnels. So it's a very different situation. And if we, depending upon where you are on that border, some places a border barrier is very good. Some places it has been very good. Some places, because of the MO of the cartels there, it really wouldn't affect things very much, right? So when we talk about putting more border barrier in the San Diego sector, well, the areas, we've already built the wall in the San Diego sector for the most part. So in the urban areas, right? So there are a lot of rural areas, but drugs really don't come across those. It's really people coming and usually turning themselves in. You can build a wall to the moon in the San Diego sector, and it isn't going to have much of an impact on narcotics. But now if we go to the Texas, again, back to the Texas border in the Rio Grande Valley sector, building a wall there does have an impact when it comes to narcotics. It just depends on where we're talking about. But I think people need to realize that that most of the urban areas along the U.S.-Mexico border have actually already have the wall. They already have a big barrier that's 18 feet high, some places 12 feet high. They already have those barriers that we're trying to build in other places. The only large urban area along the entire U.S.-Mexico border that doesn't have the barrier built is Laredo, Texas, and that's between Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, right? Laredo, Texas, and Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, and that's actually the headquarters of Los Zetas, one of the most brutal cartels in Mexico. So it's kind of bizarre that they don't have the barrier, but most of all of the other urban areas do have that barrier. So for several decades, people on the left and migrant advocates were saying, hey, you know, the U.S. is funneling people. They built these walls in the cities, so now it funnels migrants into the deserts and into these dangerous areas where migrants are dying. They've said that for decades. Well, the implication is that obviously the barriers are working because it's funneling people to another place. People aren't just coming across it. They're having to go way out of the way to try to get in. Well, now what's happening is finally, you know, they're going to get their wish, and there's going to be a barrier built in those remote places so that migrants aren't entering those dangerous places in mass. Some will still get over, some will still get around it, but in mass they're not entering. And now they're saying, well, you know, that's inhumane, and now they've dropped the inhumane talking point, and they're saying, no, the walls don't work, the barriers don't work. Well, if you just go back and look over the last 20 years of what their advocates and what people on the left have said, primarily on the left, some groups on the right are okay with it, too, but if you look at what they've said, it's very clear that barriers do have an impact. So it really just depends on where we're talking about. There's so much. I mean, we could talk for an hour or two about this, and it takes about an hour to really sufficiently discuss what's going on there, even at a 10,000-foot level, in the different regions that compose our border, you know, our shared border with Mexico. But the barriers do work for some things. Because we've already built barriers in urban areas over the last 2 decades, a lot of criminal groups, you know, if you were to go to the DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment, you'll see that almost 90% of the heroin that comes in the country comes in through ports of entry. Almost 90% of the cocaine that comes in the country comes in through ports of entry. The same is true with methamphetamine, and that's because those barriers work, and so it's shifted. So a lot of the drugs that do come in across the border would in fact start coming through ports of entry if we built a barrier in some of these areas, and then that allows us to focus our resources and our technology on the ports of entry, right?
Okay. Yeah, you're making so much sense
here. It does get very complicated.
Well, but this is why we had to have you on to talk about this, because what you've just explained, so you've walked us through it. We've just taken a tour of the southern border. You talk about the cities where there is very little illegal immigration because the wall is there. So seeing the wall, illegal entrants go to open spaces where it's a fact many of them die. We covered on the show yesterday, it's about 150 to 200 or a little under 200 bodies a year, bodies of human beings that are remains that are found every year in these different desert areas along the southern border. And so what's happening is
400 last year.
Oh, 400. Wow. So then that's not even the total tally, what we reported yesterday. So, Brandon, you got these people coming in and they're dying. And what we're saying is this is a humanitarian crisis. We have human trafficking and smuggling, and we could actually focus more of our efforts on reducing the drugs coming in. That's what you just described. We could use our money and resources on technology and people to prevent the drugs from coming in, which is what's contributing to the tens of thousands of Americans who are dying from opioid overdoses and methamphetamine and everything else. But the Democrats are saying, well, yeah, but that would be inhumane. What is inhumane about stopping people from dying in our deserts while they're trying to come in?
Well, let's look at that real quick when we talk about opioids. So here's what happened. And as we began to decriminalize marijuana in the United States, then U.S. companies began to produce higher quality marijuana than what was being grown in the fields of Mexico, which is what most of their illicit crops were fields were designated for marijuana. That became known as Mexican swag rather than the kind bud or the hydro that we grew in the U.S. Well, Mexicans couldn't compete, so what they began to do was they began to do two things to replace their profits. One is they turned toward smuggling of humans, and that's when we began to see the overwhelming numbers being promoted going to the Rio Grande Valley sector, right? That's when the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas began to make more of their money from illegal immigration and from our asylum system than they did from narcotics, and that's because they were trying to replace their marijuana profits that they lost. And then in Mexico as a whole, the Sinaloa and others stopped growing marijuana in the fields, and they started cultivating poppy. So they began to flood our market with heroin because they were trying to replace their lost profits from marijuana. Now, one of the problems with Mexican heroin is that it is not very good. It's called black tar heroin. And so they realized that if they would mix fentanyl into their substandard heroin, then it would be just as good as the Asian heroin, and it would make people feel just as good. And that's why we're having overdoses, is because we have an influx of Mexican heroin mixed with Chinese fentanyl. So I'm not against decriminalization of marijuana by any means, but I do think that we need to acknowledge that all of our policy choices do have consequences, and one of the negative consequences, we would call negative, I would call negative for sure, is that Mexican marijuana fields turn to poppy production, you know? So I think that's something that we do need to discuss when we're talking about our heroin and opioid overdoses. Most of them aren't opioid overdoses. Well, they are only because of the fentanyl, right? It's the uncontrollable, unknowable amount of fentanyl in a hit that is killing people.
Wow. Okay. So much information.
Sorry,
no, it's fantastic. I'm just trying to take it all in because here I am sitting here thinking I know a little something. I had no idea that the legalization of marijuana was actually driving the okay. But in any case, what you're talking about is that we have this short-sighted view, and it's driven by different forces, right? The people who want to make marijuana legal aren't interested in other illicit drugs because their primary thing that they're interested in is marijuana. But what we do see is we have bad actors south of the border who are determined to make money off of Americans using drugs. And so if you take one option away, they just move to the next one. And they haven't changed their methods because Americans are dying from their new mix. They're just like, well, you know, that's your problem. We're still going to sell drugs in America. I mean, so we're dealing with an evil force that is out to make money off of us, come hook or crook, and we have to address this. You know what I'm going to do? I want you to answer that, but when we hear the music, that means we don't have any time left, and I'm going to hold you over so you can kind of wrap all of this up with your suggestions on what we should do. So isn't that the case, though? We have this evil group down there. They're doing what they do best, regardless of what happens to Americans.
We have about 1,100 evil groups down there doing it. It's not a group. The cartel, I mean, we'll talk about it when you get back, but basically there are countless Mexican cartels, transnational criminal groups in Mexico, and many times competing with each other. And, you know, we don't acknowledge that as a nation. We see, for instance, the Sinaloa cartel as a cartel, and we don't acknowledge that it's actually a federation of hundreds of regional cartels who are oftentimes at war with each other, even though we call them the Sinaloa. And our inability to see nuance creates an inability. We have these solutions that are one size fits all, when they're really not effective because we're unable to recognize the differences in the group.
You're good, Brandon, because you stopped just before the music. We're going to wrap up with you. Thank you for holding over. I appreciate your time. It's been so good to talk to you. We're going to keep Brandon Darby over. Brandon, director of Border and Cartel Chronicles Project for Breitbart News, good friend of mine and good friend of the show. We'll be back with him and more for you right here on American Family Radio.
Can solid teamwork building principles apply to all of life? Here's Tony Dungy, author of The Soul of a Team, with today's uncommon moment.
In my book, The Soul of a Team, SOUL is an acronym. And the U in the acronym stands for unity, which means understanding and rallying around your team's mission, philosophy, and culture through open communication and positive conflict resolution. The Apostle Peter wrote, "All of you should be of one mind, sympathize with each other, love each other as brothers and sisters, be tender-hearted, and keep a humble attitude." Someone can bring disunity without being completely at odds with what the team is trying to accomplish. As a result, little by little, over time, the team may find itself well off course, and they cannot generate the momentum needed for high achievement.
Tony Dungy, best-selling author of The Soul of a Team, from Tyndale House. More at CoachDungy.com.
I was drinking and I tried to stop on my own, but I couldn't, and it was a complete disaster for my family. I decided to make a change by coming to Teen Challenge. My life is transforming right now, and I have come to realize that God has a plan for me.
If you or a loved one are struggling with addiction, Adult to Teen Challenge can help. There are centers across the country, and you can find the one nearest you at 855-END-ADDICTION or at TeenChallengeUSA.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
Listen, do you really know who Jesus is? And let me help you to know who he is. You think about all of these kind of false Jesuses that are floating around social media. Oh, you know the Jesus. You know, you got the ethnocentric Jesus. You got the political Jesus, the left-wing Jesus. You know, all these popular Jesuses. But the question I think all of us need to ask is, will the real Jesus stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up.
Tuned in to Equipped, weekday afternoons at 12 Central on Urban Family Talk.
This is Fox on Justice, a big win for supporters of the wall, and new evidence that at least in some cases, walls work. This particular wall is in Bakersfield, California. It doesn't stretch for hundreds of miles. It only goes a few feet. The wall blocks a walkway between two neighborhoods, Stockdale Estates and the Amberton subdivision. Michael and Dan Hansen put up the wall in 2013. According to their lawyer, the Hansens' home and others nearby had been repeatedly burglarized and vandalized. But some of their neighbors didn't find the wall very neighborly. Among other things, kids had been using that walkway to get to and from school for years. The battle over the wall went to court, as these things tend to do. The Hansens argued that since the wall went up, the mischief stopped. But the judge ruled for the neighbors and ordered the Hansens to tear down that wall. But on appeal, a reversal, the court ruling the wall was on the Hansens' property, so they were legally entitled to build it. With Fox on Justice, Hank Weinblum, Fox News.
You can download episodes of Stacy on the Right from the podcast page on AFR.net or UrbanFamilyTalk.com. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Okay, you guys, we're going to be finishing up our chat with Brandon Darby. I want to give you a preview of my guest lineup for the next few days. We're speaking to NFL champ Burgess Owens and Dr. Carol Swain and the Sam Sorbo. That's who's coming up on the show over the next few days. So super excited about that. Right now, I'm still super excited. And I mean, I have to temper my excitement with the subject matter, but I'm always really it's a fascinating walk through what's really going on at the southern border with our current guest, Brandon Darby. He's the director of Border and Cartel Chronicles Project for Breitbart News. And I feel like speaking to people who've been on the border, who've actually spent time on the border, who know it, he's mapped it out for us. He clearly knows it. And so, Brandon, how would you wrap this up? Because it's a lot of information. I'm sure people are going to share this on the podcast and really have discussions about it. What do we do? I know, first of all, we need to seal the southern border. We need to secure it. But what else do we need to do to make this problem, it's never going all the way away, but we could definitely do better than this. I'm not sure if you guys are hearing Brandon, but I'm not hearing Brandon. Let me look and see if my producer has. Oh, okay. So he couldn't hold over. So I did not want to kind of take his extra time, but he's probably got another interview scheduled. I think one of the things that is most important for us, and when we're having this discussion, is to know the information such as what he shared. He literally gave us a picture of what happens when we make a unilateral decision. And I know it's been decades in the making. People wanting to legalize marijuana, people wanting to make, marijuana an opportunity for people to basically lots of people going to prison for possessing marijuana or for, growing it and selling it to their friends and neighbors, marijuana dealers selling it to kids. So it has been an illicit drug. It's still a federal crime to own it, to use it, et cetera, et cetera. But state by state, people have been pushing out and making a change. Well, I can't be that person who, I know I get a lot of people who are upset with me online about this, but I'm not interested in the legalization of marijuana. It is not something that I think is a good idea. And if you look at the research and what it does to the developing brains of kids, the human brain develops until the age of 25, especially in men. So you're smoking marijuana and retarding that growth while it's going on. So they said, well, just wait and make it legal at 25. Well, people who are most interested in smoking marijuana are not 25-year-olds. They have some interest, but the highest level of interest comes in at the level of the kids, teenagers. They want to do it then. And others say, oh, it's not a gateway drug, but it is. Once you start using marijuana, for some people, they're not able to stop. And people who are predisposed to have a problem with addiction, for them, starting off with marijuana just means they're now on the path to harder illicit drugs. So whatever the case might be, if you're for marijuana legalization or if you're against it, the fact is that we're moving towards this cleaner, safer marijuana in the United States, homegrown, and these thousands of groups, as he said, 1,100, 1,500, whatever that number was of groups that are down there fighting over the right to deal drugs to us, it paints a much more stark picture than what we're hearing from people like Nancy Pelosi. And we don't have a choice in the matter if we want to save lives. If we want to save lives, we have to first make it so that people can't get through the border. Then some will still get through, but the number will be so greatly reduced that we can then concentrate, as Brandon Darby said, on those areas where we clearly are not catching the drugs. They're coming through anyway because we don't have the manpower and the resources and the technology that's needed to stop them at the ports of entry. So let's go to the phones, and then I have so much more. In fact, I have audio number 3, which is about prayer rugs being found out in the desert. First, let's go to the phones. We have Robert in Oklahoma. Thank you for calling the show today.
Thank you, Stacey. I just had a comment to make about the criticism of the Christian policy of the rights of the school that the Vice President Rice is going to.
Yeah.
And it should be basically, everybody should understand that basically the progressive sense is that any sexual rights should trump over any religious rights. These are the same people who holler about separation of church and state, yet they trying to invade the church and any Christian organization with their political correctness. And I think I wish someone would play Last Man Standing with the brilliant show that Tim Allen had, which talked about people getting so upset about political correctness.
It was a good show. It's
because
back.
It was an example of them trying to also hinder free speech and freedom of religion, and that's what I had to say.
Such a good comment. So, Robert, you're right. It's one of those things where they keep saying with their mouths that they don't want to influence anything. They just want to love whoever they can love, and et cetera. But what they really have fallen into is a form of totalitarianism. Anything that their ideas touch has to be converted into their ideology, which means everything. Everything they see, everything that exists in this world has to be converted and morphed into something that, hews to their ideology. It means you can't have church. You can't have folks, over there believing whatever they want. The First Amendment, it exists, but only for people who believe like we do. So let's go to Mary in Kansas. Hey, Mary, thanks for calling the show today.
Thank you. I have a thought you may not be able to answer today, but the veteran that's been raising money in Florida for the wall through the what that site is.
Yeah, GoFundMe. Yeah.
Can he go through the state of Texas itself and see if the state itself could take the money and start building the wall without going through the federal government? And that money could go ahead and be starting on that area that is really the worst along the Texas border. And I was just wondering, if that is possible.
Well, okay, so the short answer is I do not know, but I did have that story from yesterday. We listened to the audio of one of the more recent. He was just elected in the fall. He's a young guy. He's from West Virginia, and he's asking his state to appropriate $10 million to send to the federal government for building of the wall. So he wants states to contribute. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement falls under the federal government, and that has been remanded to the executive by Congress. Congressional acts that have passed have been signed into law. So the president it's his purview. Now, how it's funded is a whole nother thing, and it's so complex. One of my, and I've mentioned this before, and I think we're going to be able to get a Heritage guest on next week to kind of explain the law to us a little bit, because it's so difficult to, you can just kind of look it up yourself. I've done some, searching on Bing to find out what is the law, but there are so many laws in the Federal Register about how things are done. We know appropriations have to come through the House of Representatives. They control the purse. But as far as states contributing, that's a whole nother thing. And I don't believe that the state of Texas has the right to erect a wall on their own. But then again, we just heard about the ranchers who erected wall on their private property. I don't know if the state of Texas can do it. So the answer is I don't know. But that's a great question, and we will answer it with a guest from the Heritage Foundation. So here's the big story that I don't know how the news media is reporting it because, hey, we're here live on the radio. But I have tweeted out a picture of a letter from the President of the United States, and it says, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi has her address. Dear Madam Speaker, due to the shutdown, I'm sorry to inform you that your trip to Brussels, Egypt, and Afghanistan has been postponed. We will reschedule this 7-day excursion when the shutdown is over. In light of the 800,000 great American workers not receiving pay, I'm sure that you would agree that postponing this public relations event is totally appropriate. I also feel that during this period, it would be better if you were in Washington negotiating with me and joining the strong border security movement to end the shutdown. Obviously, if you would like to make your journey by flying commercial, that would certainly be your prerogative. I look forward to seeing you soon and even more forward to watching our open and dangerous southern border finally receive the attention, funding, and security it so desperately deserves. So, savagery is now in play. The president canceled the plane that she's planning on using. What I love about it is that he's been saying to her, come on, let's talk about this. She's been basically switching goalposts. Well, if you just would open the government, then we could talk. He says, okay, I'll open the border. Within 30 days, will we have a deal? No wall. So she doesn't want a wall. She's not going to give in or help him in any way. And I think if we're looking at this thing, he's got to stick to his guns. And that's what he's doing. But the details are so dastardly, and there's no good news down there. Like, people keep saying, well, we should, some new survey says that 65% of Democrats would let anyone enter our southern border as long as they weren't a criminal. So you don't have to be lawful. You don't need immigration. Just come in through the southern border, anyone, as long as you're not a criminal or a terrorist. What are they feeding Democrats in America today? I almost feel like that survey must be some sort of a hoax. So here is a border rancher, a woman who lives and owns property on the southern border of the United States, talking about the things they found and how many people come through the border who are not Mexican. It's number 3.
So I obviously don't have any proof of it, but I've talked to several agents that I trust. There's not a lot that I do trust, but the ones that I do trust, I've talked to them. The percentage of what Border Patrol classifies as OTMs has really increased in the last couple years, but drastically even in the last 6 months. Chinese, Germans, Russians, a lot of Middle Easterners, those Czechoslovakians they caught over on our neighbor this last summer. There's a lot of people coming in from not just Mexico, and people, the general public, just don't get the terrorist facts of that. And that's what's really scary, is you don't know what's coming across. We found prayer rugs out here. It's unreal. It's not just Mexican nationals that are coming over.
Well, wouldn't that be something that Nancy Pelosi should be concerned about? Prayer rugs? So that means it's easier to get into the country to do things you want to do, and they could be anything, terrorist things, kidnappings, whatever you want to do. It's easier to get into the country by just fly into Guatemala or Mexico, make the trek up north, and travel into the country under radar. Because when you fly into the country, there's a plane ticket, and there's at least a record that you entered the country, a searchable database where the FBI and Homeland Security and DHS, they can say, you know who just flew into the country? That's how they find out that terrorists are in the country. They'll see the terrorist has applied for a visa in their home country. They know they're on a terror watch list, and so that flag, a human being, an FBI agent, an agent at Homeland Security, will then reach out to their counterpart and say, you know, this flag has just been raised. This person is in America. They flew into this port, and we are now, you know, they're now researching to find out which way did they go. Where did they stay in the city that they flew into, or are they going somewhere else? It's so interesting that they've done that for so long when they could just go to the southern border and come in that way. The danger of the trek is outweighed by if someone's radicalized and want to do terrorism, or if someone, as Brandon Darby just said, these people are dealing not just in narcotics, but in people. There's a lot of money in it. And when you're at that level of evil, you're not going to let the fact that it's 100 degrees in the shade stop you from doing what you need to do. You're going to get around that. There's enough technology out there to get around it. In fact, if you go to my Facebook page, I posted a story from CBS. It was so funny. One of the good friends of the show online, she sent it to me in direct message. She's like, you know, got the laughing face. Her name's Michelle. She sends me all these great stories. The story is a suspected drug smugglers get stuck trying to drive over the U.S.-Mexico fence. So you know the steel slat fence that has been such a source of contention? They actually put metal rods up one side of it and slid metal rods down the other side. Now, are you picturing this? If you want to see it for yourself, just go to the Facebook page. It's posted right there. And they drove a Jeep Cherokee up the steel slats on so these two pieces of metal to support a car that weighs probably, what, 4,000 pounds, plus what they have in it. They drive it up to the top, but because the top of the fence it's pointed and the two pieces are touching there, once it got to the top, the body of the car is now stuck. So the car is literally stuck on the top of the border fence with the metal rods on each side. And that is sitting there as an example of how, I guess, smart these drug smugglers are. And I posted, you know, smart enough to steal into America, not smart enough to improve their own country. Last night, as I was cooking, I was thinking, why are they so bent on selling drugs in America? And then I thought about it. We have the disposable income to buy drugs here in America. In Mexico, when you're making $1 a day or $3 a day, you don't have any money for drugs. You're not interested in getting high on drugs. You want money for food. You're trying to make it just to live. So if the cartels are selling drugs to Americans and you can work for them, then that's what you're going to do. It's just pure evil. And it's also pure evil on our side that we aren't doing anything about it. And that's why the government shut down. And I hope it stays shut down. I think we're past the 30-day point. Let's start riffing some folks, no offense, and get the Democrats back to the table. All right. Thank you for being with us today. If you are out of here, God bless you from the heartland. If you're hanging around, we have more for you after these messages from onenewsnow.com.
Family Talk.
It was a time when men rebuilt the ruins. With one hand they laid bricks, with the other they held a weapon. Nehemiah said, "Let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach." Our nation, after many years of decline, is in a state of moral destruction. The cry is going out.
Do you see the distress we're in?
Join us in the battle. To learn more about our mission, visit urbanfamilytalk.com.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
For American Family News, I'm Chris Woodward. The back and forth continues between President Trump and top Democrats. Still lacking the $5+ billion for a border wall, President Trump sent a letter Thursday canceling House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's foreign travel. Pelosi was scheduled to visit Brussels, Egypt, and Afghanistan. Pelosi, meanwhile, wants the president to postpone his State of the Union address because of the partial government shutdown. Another caravan of migrants is making its way through Guatemala, heading for the U.S. Fox's Steve Harrigan is traveling with the group.
The caravan of Central American migrants remains about 2,000 strong. They're expected to add members as they cross through the nation of Guatemala. There, they'll test their reception at the border with Mexico en route to the U.S. The U.S. Border Patrol says of the 7,000 Central American migrants in the previous convoy back in October, as many as half tried to enter the U.S. illegally. Others stayed to work in Mexico, and a smaller number returned home to Central America. On Highway 9 in Guatemala, Steve Harrigan, Fox News.
Despite surviving a no-confidence vote on Wednesday, Prime Minister Theresa May now faces a larger struggle to find a way out of the country's Brexit impasse. Fox's Benjamin Hall reports from London.
With no clear majority in Parliament for any single alternative, there's a growing chance that Britain may seek to postpone its departure date, while politicians work on a new plan or even hand the decision back to voters in a new referendum on Britain's EU membership. May has till Monday to present Plan B to Parliament, who will vote on it on the 29th. The UK, though, is scheduled to leave the EU in just 70 days. In London, Benjamin Hall, Fox News.
Faculty members at Michigan State University are praising the former dean who's been appointed to lead the university following the resignation of John Engler. The Board of Trustees announced today that former College of Engineering Dean Satish Udpa would replace Engler as interim president. Engler was pushed to resign this week after making controversial comments about some victims of former sports doctor and convicted sex abuser Larry Nassar. Facebook is denying accusations it started a viral meme to mine data. Kristen Goodwin has more.
The 10-year challenge, the latest viral craze. Folks have been sharing two photos of themselves a decade apart with the hashtag 10-year challenge. Some data experts say the public pictures can help companies working with facial recognition and machine learning. Tech consultant Kate O'Neill saying in a Wired op-ed, thanks to this meme, there's now a very large data set of carefully curated photos of people from roughly 10 years ago and now. Facebook denies claims it started it, tweeting, the 10-year challenge is a user-generated meme that started on its own without our involvement. It's evidence of the fun people have on Facebook, and that's it. Kristen Goodwin, Fox News.
Several active weather systems remain in the western United States, bringing the potential for winter weather across the area. Fox News senior meteorologist Janice Dean has more.
The next system coming this weekend will be much stronger with heavier precipitation. The highest confidence for the heaviest snow will be across the interior Northeast and interior New England, where over a foot is possible. There will likely be a snow mixing with rain and or ice and sleet, then back to snow for the I-95 corridor from New York City southward. Boston northward has the potential to see more snow than the rest of the I-95 corridor, but people need to pay attention to their local forecasts for the latest details. Behind all of this, an Arctic air mass will move in across the Great Lakes and the Midwest, bringing frigid temperatures and even colder wind chills as we head into Monday. I'm Janice Dean, Fox News.
And Sears is confirming reports its chairman and largest shareholder Eddie Lampert's hedge fund has won a bid to buy roughly 400 stores and other assets for $5.2 billion. The move would save 45,000 jobs and is subject to court approval on February 1st. However, creditors will have the opportunity to object before then. The deal would close on February 8th. Find more news at onenewsnow.com. Thanks for listening.
Abraham Hamilton III.
God put us in this world at this time to be salt and light. We don't fold because of the darkness that we're facing. This is not the first time in the world's history that it's gotten dark. God has called you and I to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment.
Tune in to the Hamilton Quarter, weekdays at 5 p.m. Central on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Karen Pence is the wife of the vice president. She's teaching art at a place where the application requires would-be employees to initial next to a list of beliefs, including certain moral misconduct.
Congress is the only one that can fund the border. Congress is the only one that can open up government. They need to go do their job. And think about it, they're talking about doing a recess. If in my business life, I'd say, if we have a problem, we're all staying here until we get it resolved.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Welcome back to the program. It's hour 2 of Stacy on the Right here on Urban Family Talk and American Family Radio. Thank you so much for being with us. Happy Thursday to you. It's Friday Eve, and we have so much more for you. I'm going to actually go straight to this audio. It's feel-good audio. And I probably could have saved it for Friday because we like to have feel-good stories on Friday, but this is fun. And I think it's just an example of what we can do as a community of believers for people in our communities, our larger communities, to try to show them the love of Christ. And so this is such a great, it's a great piece. And it's not a condemnation for any church that's not doing this. All churches are involved in philanthropic and charitable work. It's only to point out that sometimes the things, when you get an idea, which is how this all came about, you get this idea to do something and it can turn into something that it really is so impactful that local news decided to do a story on it. So take a listen. It's number 6.
If the church does not impact the community that the church is in, then the church isn't doing its job.
Pastor Chris Everson's congregation at the Royce City First United Methodist Church has a tradition of donating holiday offerings to charity.
Last year, we heard about the need at our, what we call our sister school, Davis Elementary School.
The congregation paid off $1,700 in lunch debt for that school in 2017, then took it a step further.
The question came up, what would it look like if we did this for the entire ISD?
The answer? A 200-member congregation came up with more than $10,000 to cover any student $20 or more behind in school lunch payments.
It's going to make such an impact for families when they log onto that account and they see, oh, I don't know anything. What a feeling.
Wow. So this is something small, obviously. I mean, your lunch account at school being, $20 in arrears is not something that probably is keeping parents up at night. But it is something that if you go in to pay your account and the account has been paid, that families kind of feel like, whoa, what a break. That, however into the red it was, that just gives them a little more time to put some money into the account. And it keeps working class families who are struggling with that. It just gives them a little boost over the holiday. And so, I thought the story was great because he starts off, they interviewed him in the church, the pastor, and he says, what are we doing as the church? And it started off that they were just doing the school in the independent school district that was closest to them, the little elementary school. And it got such a great response that they decided, what we'd like to do is do the entire district. And then they put that number forward that it was around 10 grand to pay all of the lunch accounts in arrears. And then the congregation responded. I know over Christmas we had an offering for missions that raised, and I was shocked by how much money was raised that one weekend where they dedicated the donations from, obviously more people go to church on the holidays, and that Christmas service, it raised a lot of money for the missions that our church is involved in. And so I think people are really generous and open with giving, especially during the holidays, or if it's a specific need that they hear this needs to be met. And we also know this to be true because of our audience here at American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk, such an amazing, giving, responsive audience. And so it's just fun to hear that other people are doing that. And in this case, for kids at school, for lunches. So, especially now that kids can eat, in addition to salads, they can eat other things like chocolate milk and pizza, again, because now they have regular lunch instead of the Michelle Obama lunch program that was forced down their throats during the Obama administration. So now I want to pivot over to this newly elected congressional member. Her last name's Omar. And she is under a little bit of fire, even from mainstream media outlets, for tweets that she has sent out back in 2012 and other times about Palestine and Israel. She's very much anti-Israel. Her comments are now being construed as possibly being anti-Semitic. And I can't even begin to express how disturbing it is when you're listening to her that she's been elected to our actual U.S. Congress. It's just, I was listening to a couple of the interviews that she's given over the past few days. And I'm like, how did this woman get elected in America with these views? But this is the prevalence of liberalism, and it's a disease that is infecting people's minds and causing them to be unable to think. And the influx in immigration from places that don't have American ideals, and they're concentrating the refugees and immigrants from these countries in areas where they're just recreating the same situations that they had in their home countries. I said it, and I'm not sorry. These people are not being assimilated into American culture and our way of life. This woman is still wearing a headscarf in America, where we're all supposed to be free and liberated and feminism rules. She's covering her head up. She's living under Sharia-type conditions. Here she is, and I'm just unbelievable. She's defending a tweet, and she says she doesn't know how her comments could be construed as being offensive to Jewish Americans. It's number one.
Oh, that's really a regrettable way of expressing that. I don't know how my comments would be offensive to Jewish Americans. My comments precisely are addressing what was happening during the Gaza war. And I am clearly speaking about the way that the Israeli regime was conducting itself in that war.
So she calls Israel a regime. Now, why would she do that? Why would she say that the Israelis are a part of a regime? A regime is a form of government or the set of rules, cultural, or social norms that regulate the operation of a government or institution and its interactions with society. That's the typical definition that you can find online. But it also means a government, especially an authoritarian one. Now, she's talking about Israel, one of the most free and open societies on the face of this planet, a country that accepts Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims into their country, not just to work, but to actually live and become citizens. They're very open and free, and they have completely converted the little sliver of land that they have into a paradise and an economic marvel. And they've done all of that under threat of war for the entirety of their nation's existence. And they're constantly having rockets fired into their country by people who come from the same place that this woman comes from. But she calls the Israeli government, which is legitimate and recognized internationally, a regime. Not only is it not authoritarian, but it is the only standing democracy in the Middle East. All of the other ones are actual authoritarian regimes. But that language, that carefully constructed use of regime and other terms to try to sway opinion and to she's speaking in code to her audience, it just signifies how far we've fallen that we would have this woman elected to serve in our Congress. It's a shame. It is an absolute abomination. But if you go to the place where she was elected from, you probably wouldn't recognize much of America there either. I don't care who I just upset just now. You're going to be all right. And if you're mad, I don't care. I hope you understand why I don't care. So Jacob in Alabama, thank you so much for calling the show.
How you doing, my sister?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm blessed. All is well. Get any better, I wouldn't be able to stand it. I tell you, you told me your main scripture is going to be 37 and 73 in Psalms. But he also told me to share this with you as well. Be very, very watchful when the Lord moves on the foolishness of Nancy Pelosi, Sister Tlaib, and all of them. Because 17, you're going to have to do not rejoice when your enemy falls, because they're going to fall. And do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles, lest the Lord see it and it displeases him and he turn away his wrath upon him. Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the wicked. But there will be no prospect for the evil man. The lamp of the wicked will be put out.
So good. And it's a great reminder. And you know what, Jacob? We do need reminding. And I was just talking about this with one of our kids. When we say, well, this person's been mean or this has happened, and you're trying to coach your kid through it, and then later something happens and you see that person is now experiencing something bad. And the Bible says that is when we're the most in danger as, the person who was aggrieved, because then we may take joy in that or relish that, kind of comeuppance. And then the Lord will have sympathy on our enemy. And then, so it's like, don't get happy when you see your enemy come to, their just desserts. And we saw that a lot in the Bible with David. He would have like the opportunities he had to kill Saul, and he didn't take them because he refused to touch the Lord's anointing. And then after Saul's death, as David was coming into his kingdom bit by bit, people would kill members of the kind of the government of Saul, the ruler's people, and they would bring, the person's head to David, and look, I killed your enemy's, his head person. And he's like, you can't be killing people because they work for Saul. Saul was God's anointed, and so now you have to die. And on every opportunity, David always pointed out that he would not participate in touching God's anointing or trying to force or shoehorn his way into what had already been given to him. He'd already been blessed and anointed as the next king, but he wasn't going to take it by force or by hook or by crook or through his own power. He waited on God to make the moves. And we have to be reminded of that for the same thing. I'm in the same boat. When I get excited about something or I see an opportunity, I'm like, you know what? All I have to do is do this, this, and this, or make this phone call or send this email, and let's get this thing going. And what I've been learning over time, this past few years especially, is that God can have something in store for you, but it's not our timing, it's his. And so it's a great point. And I do believe that, this woman from the congresswoman from, one of these areas, they sent her there to do that. Now we have Keith Ellison and others who practice Islam talking about they're going to have all of the members of the Congress be Muslim, and they're going to have even all the way up to the presidency. They're going to have the entire government. It's going to be Muslim. Yeah, I don't actually think that's going to happen. But it bears discussion. We can't be those people who are like with blinders on and not seeing the changes that are happening in our country. But instead of getting enraged about it or, feeling depressed or getting pushed around about it, we just have to remember that God is in control and he's going to work all things out for our good. And there's so many examples in the Bible where he took, even when his anointed ones, even when people who he has this amazing relationship with them, they would make a mistake, God would still bring about the fulfillment of prophecy and the resolution of things that were impacting the nation of Israel. He would bring those things about through their mistakes because he is able and he's ready and able to do anything and far above all that we dare ask or think, obviously. And so it's just good. It's good to focus on that. So as we're going out here, I want to cover one more thing. We have Eric Scheiner, director of MRCTV. He's going to come on and talk about the caravan organizer, the most recent caravan that actually reached the southern border. He was arrested on rape charges, and 250 illegal aliens arrested after a smuggling operation. Again, we're back to this illicit drugs and everything like that. But this is actually good news. This last little news piece I have, it's a story out of Ireland where they just had a referendum to legalize abortion in their country. So doctors and nurses across the Republic of Ireland are refusing to participate in abortions following the recent change in the law. There are 19 maternity units in the country, and more than half of them are not providing abortions currently because the doctors and nurses are objecting on conscience grounds. One of the doctors said, on a personal level, I will never do anything that will intentionally lead to the death of one of my patients, be that a baby in the womb or anybody else, an older sick person, whether I'm operating within the law. Dr. Andrew O'Regan, co-carry practitioner. The welfare of the patients in front of me is more important than a very, very corrupt law. This is the ultimate in standing on what's right. I applaud these people. All right, when we get back, we'll have our guests for you. Stay there.
Over the past few years, the AFR family has teamed up with India partners to help rescue young children from Mumbai's red light district. Through your gifts, new safe houses have been built and existing homes have been expanded, allowing more children to have their basic needs met. They are being taught who Jesus is and about his love for them. Payel was one of the children rescued.
I came to know about Jesus after I came over to this safe house. I didn't know anything about Jesus, but after I came over here, my life changed.
AFR staff members will visit these safe houses in January. They would like to bring some personal notes from you to remind these children that they are loved and are being prayed for. Would you please join us in providing a note of encouragement? You can find all the details and where to send your letter by visiting afr.net. That's afr.net. We hope you'll join us as we share God's love with these precious children by writing a simple note of encouragement. Visit afr.net, afr.net.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Where are the moderate Muslims? This is a question I hear whenever there's a terrorist attack and there seems to be silence from the Muslim community. Christine Douglas Williams tries to answer that question and many others in her book, The Challenge of Modernizing Islam. When she was on my radio program, she said that the original title talked about reforming Islam. They concluded that that wasn't precise enough. She points out that currently there is a turf war within Islam between those who seek to reform Islam back to the 7th century and those who seek to reform it to modernity. The first part of her book includes interviews she has done with moderate Muslims like Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, Dr. Tawfiq Hamid, and Rahil Raza. Although I have interviewed some of them, we don't hear from them in the mainstream media too often because many of them aren't given a platform. Of course, we also have to acknowledge that many of them are threatened if they speak out. The subtitle of Christine Douglas Williams' book says it all: Reformers Speak Out and the Obstacles They Face. You know, it's worth mentioning that not all moderates are reformers. Reformers usually insist that the text in Islam must be subject to new interpretations. To do so will be difficult. It might mean, for example, having to set aside 14 centuries of interpretation as well as Muslim history. Now, most of those interviewed also believe that a Muslim's attitude towards Israel was a significant factor in determining their Islamist sympathies. Although one doesn't have to be a Muslim to dispute Israel's right to exist, her chapter explains how classical anti-Semitism has really become part of the Arab intellectual life. Her book, I believe, is a powerful reminder of how hard it will be to bring Islam into the modern world. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
This is Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
All right, welcome back to the show. You can find us online everywhere. Instagram at Stacy on the Right. Check me out there. And also, you can find the Facebook pages for Urban Family Talk and American Family Radio. You can hit the notifications button, whatever you want to do. We have great content over there as well. Thank you for being with us today. Let's go to our guest. We have Eric Scheiner, director of MRCTV. Thanks, Eric, for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Stacy. Great to be here.
You know, so it's like whenever you think the other shoe is dropped, then there's a third or eighth or 100th shoe. And this is information that you guys sent out today about the caravan organizer who's been arrested on rape charges and 250 illegal aliens arrested after a smuggling operation went wrong. What is going on?
Yeah, well, you know, it seems in many cases these caravans that are coming to the U.S. want to prove President Trump right, that this is an invasion, and that's exactly it. You know, people say that the Trump administration has been deceitful in giving out information that, you know, there's criminals and there's bad people in some of these migrant caravans, and we don't know who they are. And then these stories come out and tell us, when we find out who they are, you know, we're not so happy to find out. This is a Juan Carlos Molina. He's been identified as an organizer, a promoter of the trip, a 26-year-old man. And as he was getting ready to head over from Honduras to Mexico to go up to the U.S. border as part of one of these caravan groups, they located him because he had an outstanding warrant on rape charges from 2015. So, you know, it's exactly that kind of information that you get, it makes you go, my goodness, who are these people? And this was an organizer,
Wait, but in the United States, I want to be clear here because people are probably listening and going, wait, where was he when rape charges from in the United States?
That we haven't heard all the way through. That there's some conflicting information coming from Honduran newspapers. He has an outstanding warrant from Honduran authorities, is our understanding at this point.
Okay.
But there has been some conflicting reports that he may have some criminal allegations here in the United States, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. According to the El Heraldo, I believe it's a Honduran newspaper, it's Honduran authorities saying that he has an outstanding warrant. So that would be in Honduras.
Okay. I guess this just flies in the face of this all. They all have a spark of divinity from Nancy Pelosi and everyone else who's been saying, look, just let them in if they're not criminals. Aren't they criminals by nature of the fact that they seek to enter the country illegally? That's the first thing we have to get out of the way.
Well, I think yes. I think as soon as you enter you're breaking the law and becoming a criminal the second you enter the U.S. illegally. I think many Americans feel that way. And then a second issue that really, I think, hasn't been brought up by a lot of lawmakers is, in many cases, and those that have suffered from it, is the taking of Social Security numbers used for jobs and applications to work, the identity theft issue. And in some cases, lawmakers have stepped up and said, well, they can't possibly remember all the ones that they've taken and that they've used. And you have to question, well, why can't they remember that if they're caught? And that's another issue as well. Those that have suffered from that particular issue in terms of people that have tried to retire, collect Social Security benefits or things of that nature, or have not received a tax return because their ID has been stolen and used illegally, is an issue that affects them and will probably come to the forefront again as we enter the time of tax return season.
and again, this is where your experience kind of dictates whether or not you care. Because for liberals, it's not about whether it's right or wrong. It's about if it has impacted them. So if they've never been impacted, then they don't care. And even if they are impacted, we've seen over and over again in news stories where if a liberal is impacted negatively, then what they'll say is, well, but that still doesn't change the issue. That's anecdotal, or that's just one life, or that's, what did the guy say? I had a caller who said, those are just raw numbers. When you talk about the number of people who've been raped or kidnapped or assaulted or dangerous drug offenses, he'll say, well, those are just raw numbers. They're not percentages. So human beings killed, kidnapped, raped, etc., they're raw numbers. They're not human beings. They're not people that should impact our thinking on an issue.
Right. Well, you mentioned, you referenced Nancy Pelosi's spark of divinity comment that she made earlier when saying, everyone has the spark of divinity. We have to recognize that we can't belittle these people, when they come over. Everyone has this spark of divinity. It needs to be recognized. We should let them in. One of the interesting things is the angel moms, the parents of victims of illegal immigrants that were going to Nancy Pelosi's office and Chuck Schumer's office the other day. One of them held a sign, what about my son's spark of divinity? It was snuffed out.
And that's where it gets depressing because I honestly feel like you have to turn off your sympathetic center, the part of you that sees someone who's been hurt and you instantly feel sadness. You have to turn that off because the only people they seem to have any feeling for are people who are breaking the law or mentally ill or are having some kind of problem that a wealth transfer would solve. But if it's someone who's genuinely experienced a devastating consequence because of a program or something that they stand for, then their sympathy center is turned off and they seem unable to care. And it's like this on every issue, whether it's protecting yourself with lawfully owned firearms. I had a lady ask me on TV over the Christmas time, right before Christmas. She said, I don't agree with gun control because it prevents me from lawfully carrying a firearm to be able to protect myself. And she said, well, how many times have you been attacked? And I said, what? She said, describe to me the attacks that you've undergone that require you to now carry a firearm. I said, I don't have to describe anything to you. I don't ever have to have been attacked to want to defend myself. It's not if I've been attacked, it's preventing an attack. She said, I just want to hear who's attacked you and how many times you've been assaulted. And I was flabbergasted because what's the answer to that? Even if I told her, hey, I've been assaulted, she would have said, well, that's probably your fault. You know, there is no reasoning with these people.
No, there is no reasoning. You know, when you look at, when you look at numbers, let's take, for instance, the liberals take when you mentioned the Second Amendment and carrying weapons. You know, they're very scared of AR-15s. These are assault rifles. And if you look at the amount of people that are killed statistically by assault rifles, and granted, we don't have any hard numbers. We have certain numbers coming from the Government Accountability Office and other numbers of how many people are, killed a year at the hands of illegal aliens, be it, a homicide or a drunk driving or an accident, people that are arrested. The numbers are actually higher. They're higher, but they want to make a law to limit someone's ability to get an AR-15 because, if it saves one life. But in this case, that one life, they look at it from a completely different point of view, in a different angle, and it's just not as important to them. It's interesting, I guess, why they would have more concern about letting people cross the border than concern for people within the borders.
Well, and also, I find it confusing that it's not okay. Like, let's say I was out somewhere and I misgendered someone. That's a capital offense. Like, I've got to be punished. I've got to lose my job, right?
You might be locked. They might throw away the key on you if you do that.
And this can happen to anyone. I mean, I'm 6 feet 2 inches tall, and if I'm not wearing any makeup and I have on a hat in the wintertime, and the person just glances a quick glance, they could easily think that I'm not a woman. I mean, come on, this can happen to anyone. I've seen women before where from the side I wasn't sure it was a woman, and then when they turned around and I could see all of them, then I knew, oh, that's a woman. But this is something that for liberals, this is something you should lose your job for. You should be run out of public life. You should definitely be run out of a restaurant. But crossing the border illegally, using a gun, which is a federal crime in the commission of a crime, that actually ratchets you up to like mandatory minimum status. That kind of stuff we're supposed to just look over because it's a raw number. I don't get this at all. That's why when people say liberalism is a mental disorder, I tend to agree because nothing makes sense once you start on that path to justifying criminal activity because of the person who's doing it. So if you're a Mexican, a Guatemalan or something, you have the right to do these things because your country is horrible and you need to get into America and you need to better your life. Meanwhile, Americans, well, throw the book at her because she said that looks like a man. That man is a man. Well,
Well, let me touch upon something you said there. What about letting people cross the border and the humanitarian effort and those things that you hear from the liberal side of the argument, what part of that remedies the situation? They keep saying, well, yeah, we understand we need immigration reform, but we need to let these people through. Well, how does that reform immigration? You mentioned these countries these people are coming from. Some of these are socialist countries. These people want to leave the countries they are from to come to the United States. They're, short of stopping them at the border, how do you prevent them from coming unless you say, look, these socialist principles that they applied in these countries, they're leaving. They don't work.
Well, I wish that we had a third person in on this interview named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She'd be fantastic here. I would love to hear her explain because you've heard her comments. She says the people coming into the country illegally are actually more American than Americans because they want to come live here. All of us who are already living here and slaving the first 3 or 4 months of the year to pay our taxes, we're not the real Americans. These illegal people are. And she thinks we should have a universal income, Medicare for all, some of the stuff these countries already have where they're eating, zoo animals. And the Venezuelans are a prime example of what happens when you take a thriving capitalist society and you just make a couple of tweaks towards socialism and everything falls apart.
Well, you can even see what's happening in France. You don't even have to look at some of these countries that are economically, impoverished to a certain degree. You know what is happening in France and some of the reactions to their socialist policies and the riots that are going on there now. People are finding out that even though they asked for socialism and then they got it, oh my goodness, this isn't working out the way I thought it was, and many of them are heading right up to America, and America is getting set. And you hear people. And you hear certain socialist leftists that are making the argument that we need these exact same policies in the United States. And you look at what's happening in the countries where it's implemented, it's like, well, people are fleeing these countries. People are rioting in these countries because these policies are not working. Again, eventually, as the saying goes, eventually you run out of other people's money. That's the problem with socialism. You can't keep taking other people's money to provide all these programs.
Well, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Eric, you're dealing in a whole lot of facts and type information that they would say those are alternative facts. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would say, Eric,
well, she's
it hasn't been done right.
Yes.
Yeah, it hasn't been done right. You're just not doing it right. Just let me tell you how to do it, because I'm cute and I'm fancy and I know how to use Twitter. I know how to do it right. This is a woman who didn't have enough set by in her emergency fund to just put a deposit on an apartment when she won her election. It's as if she didn't think she was going to win. I can't imagine winning a seat in Congress and not having enough friends who would say, look, you know what? You just won a seat in Congress. We are paying your deposit. I mean, I imagine my mom and dad would be like, you're going to be so close to us. We'll pay your deposit. Like, in what universe does she not have the ability to raise that money? I just don't get it.
I guess, maybe she's been denied credit cards or lines of credit. Who knows?
Mm.
But again, giving her approach to economics, that wouldn't be entirely surprising, I guess, if that was the case. But like you said, if someone has this approach to economics, would you want to lend them money?
I wouldn't want her anywhere near any money, which is why it's so funny. So here's what I hope. I know that it's fun for us to poke fun at her, but for a woman as inept as she is, she has an amazing amount of power and social capital. And my hope is that she goes onto that committee. It's a powerful committee. She's going to learn a lot. And that she spends some time reading the documents and really understanding the work that comes through that committee. And you can learn a lot, and it can kind of change your perspective. This has happened to me on a number of issues where I was serving on a committee or a board or something, and the information that I would read to prepare for the meetings would color my perspective on issues that I thought I knew backwards and forwards. In my case, these truths, charts, graphs, et cetera, only made me more conservative because the numbers don't lie. And that's my hope for her. When she gets in there and sees how much fraud, waste, and abuse and how much pork they're actually just funneling through, and if she truly cares about, restaurant workers and working class Americans, she should have a change of heart. I mean, that's the only thing that could redeem her, because right now she's on the path to, the Democrats have actually been floating online that she should run against Trump in 2020, and they're running polls on that like she could win. And the sad part is she probably could give him a run for his money.
She probably could. She definitely has the social media capital. But like you said, she's going to be part of the House Financial Services Committee, and she's going to be looking into banking. And I think when you look into banks and lending, what do you see are two of the most expensive things as far as how fast the costs have gone up historically in America? You're looking at education and you're looking at health care.
Mm-hmm.
And when she looks at banking and she looks at any, why is there only way someone can get a college loan is if it's guaranteed through the government? Because banks aren't offering them, college loans like they used to, because the risk has proven to be too great. But instead of, looking at what the private market is doing and pulling back and having some reservations about this, well, no, the government gets involved and says, well, it's a great thing to have an education, and we're going to, fully guarantee these loans with taxpayer money. We're going to be the ones that offer up these type of loans. Why has healthcare gotten more expensive? Government involvement. As soon as Obamacare passed, why has the cost of healthcare increased so significantly? And it even goes back before Obamacare and government involvement. Hopefully she'll see that the more government gets involved with these things, the more expensive they tend to turn out. But I don't know. I don't know if she's going to come to that realization or not.
You have fantastic ideas.
What she does if she looks into these issues.
I hope she will. I hope that she will. It's just so crazy with her. Everything that's going on with her. It's just, and I would recommend to anyone who cares deeply for their children, grandchildren, anyone who's going to college, to recommend that they go to a really, really good state school and not take on $200,000 in debt. Then they can come out and be marriage material and actually start their life on the good foot. Eric Scheiner, director of MRCTV, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, talk to you again soon. We'll be back with more after this. Stay there.
And my father, your great-grandfather, fought in World War II.
Really?
He was a gunner on the big ship out in the Pacific Ocean.
Wow.
Your great-grandmother did her part, too.
Was she on a ship?
Oh, no. She stayed back home. She and a lot of her friends worked really hard in a factory because the men had gone off to war.
Ooh.
And they held scrap metal drives to help in the war effort. The folks back home were heroes, too.
Here at the American Family Association, we consider you the heroes back home. As you fulfill your responsibility of caring for your family day to day, your partnership with us is crucial as we fight the enemies of freedom in America. Thank you for your commitment to the American Family Association.
Grandpa, what's a scrap metal drive?
Let's get some cookies, and I'll tell you all about it.
Holy Spirit speaks to everybody. The problem is most folks don't listen.
Lonnie Poindexter.
If they do listen, they don't take it to heart or they get fearful or whatever. But when you listen and act upon it, wonderful things happen. And because a man of God heard the voice of God and acted upon it, it blesses me today. And you as well for listening in.
Lion Chasers. Weekday mornings at 10 Central on Urban Family Talk. It's time for truth to be unveiled. It's time to get back to God with Pastor Dexter Sanders on Urban Family Talk. Awakening and empowering everyday people to impact the world. Discovering who we are and whose we are by the Word of God. Join Pastor D each weekday at 4 o'clock Central on Urban Family Talk. And let's get back to God.
This is House Call for Health. Thanks to the Yanni or Laurel test, we now know that people hear sounds differently.
Laurel.
A woman in Hong Kong had a somewhat different kind of hearing problem. She couldn't hear the voice of her boyfriend. At the hospital, the woman could hear the doctor, but according to the Daily Mail, when a young man spoke to the patient, she couldn't hear him at all. Doctors diagnosed a rare condition called reverse slope hearing loss. With this condition, a person could only hear high frequencies, such as a woman speaking, but could not hear the words of a lower frequency, deeper-voiced males. Doctors say the condition can be brought on by stress, and this patient indicated that she'd been under a lot of stress at work. The patient made a full recovery, and now she'll have to come up with a new reason for not listening when her boyfriend talks to her. For more health news, go to foxnewshealth.com. House Call for Health, I'm Joy Piazza, Fox News.
You can watch a live stream of the show on Facebook or YouTube at Stacy on the Right. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
I think the all-channel model will still succeed, but in order to be profitable, a department store like Nordstrom's needs to learn how to make more money on the internet. So you can't just say, well, do all the right things in the bricks and mortar store, make them more experiential, etc. They've been doing that, and it's not enough. And you can see that in their results. Their high-end stores were up in sales only 0.3% over the holiday period. And that includes their e-commerce, which was up 18%. So you don't have to know a lot of algebra to know that their physical bricks and mortar stores were sharply negative during this season. So you need to embrace the inevitable. You can't just sort of build a fancier stagecoach in order to prevent the advent of the automobile. You have to build a profitable e-commerce site, and that requires redoing their business system in order to be profitable online.
So welcome back to the program. This is a little bit of we're going to segue into some business here. And I found this fascinating. They had the former CEO of Toys R Us to come on to Fox Business and talk to Stuart Barney about this retail apocalypse as it continues to roil across the country. And so we discussed this before a couple times on the show, how malls are being repurposed. And he talked about, third tier strip malls and then actual large malls that are second tier, and then first tier malls, that's going to be your gallerias, your your largest, most popular malls in a metropolitan area, those will continue to have great foot traffic, and the anchors on those malls tend to have one extra high-end retailer like a Nordstrom or a Saks or something like that, and then they'll have the traditional alternative retailer like a Macy's, and the Macy's has really supplanted your JCPenney and especially your Sears for retailers that people tend to want to go and shop at. And the Macy's keeps the floor cleaner. They keep a better handle on the clothing racks and making sure that everything is hung up and looks neat, and they have enough people working there to not only help you with your purchases, but to help you with, making decisions or pointing you in the right direction. And so those are the mainstays that will continue to do decent business. Also, Macy's has a kind of a reward program and a credit card that they link everything up to that makes them much more viable than, say, a JCPenney or a Sears. And he's talking here about Nordstrom, and I found it interesting when I was listening to the audio and watching the show. I found it interesting that no one is connecting our huge radio audience, our huge online presence here at American Family Radio, and our annual naughty lists that we put out for retailers, on which Nordstrom has been, they're not on the full-blown naughty list, but they're on the kind of, they're being naughty by refusing to acknowledge that the reason we have such a retail bonanza in the month of December and leading up to it between Thanksgiving and December and Christmas is Christmas. They have these beautiful in-store displays. Nordstrom is one of my favorite stores when it comes to cleanliness and ease of being able to see from one end of the store to the other. Their return policy is top-notch, second to none, and they have the kind of stuff that my kids and I tend to like, the stuff we like to buy for other people for gifts, the stuff we hope that we'll get for a gift. But I did not spend, I think I'm at zero. I think I spent $0 in December, well, the lead up to Christmas at Nordstrom. And it was a bit of a change for us. And it's interesting how it came about, because I pay attention to the naughty list. But last Christmas, so not 2018, I was actually at a friend's house for our book club, and we were talking about the places that we shop. And I was saying that I'd actually put it on Instagram, this picture of this display. It's in Nordstrom, it's this huge red, it's got to be like 16 feet tall. And it's a red, it's completely painted red lacquer. One of those, it's a wooden soldier type thing, a nutcracker. Not an operational one, but it's basically a red nutcracker, and they had it on the corner. And I was actually there to do a return. I took a picture of it and I posted it on Instagram. And my friend kind of called me on the carpet and she said, "You were shopping in Nordstrom? It's on the AFA naughty list." And I was totally rebuked, y'all. I was like, oh, I guess I was. So then I purposed, I said, I already went there and bought something, and then I returned something else. So it's too late for this year, but next year I'm going to pay attention. And you remember this year, for this past Christmas, on the program, I read the naughty list. I think we might have had someone from onenewsnow.com on, and we touched on it then. The point is that this time I made a conscious effort not to go in there and shop. And I think if you multiply that out across the country, 32 states, all of the multiple millions of people that we touch on a monthly basis with our radio programming and who go to the website and check out the list, that translates into what we're seeing, which was a bit of it was a depressive type of a season for Nordstrom. And as he described, they do everything right. They do have the gold standard return policy. They do take the time to have their employees really do a good job in helping you. They can translate an online sale into a retail transaction and a retail transaction into an online sale seamlessly. They're great at what they do, and the store looks fantastic. It's so easy to shop. That being said, if we're talking about convenience, then yeah, you would want to be there. But if you're talking about what matters, being able to continue to acknowledge the reason we have these holidays, yeah, there are lots of holidays that have been conveniently stationed around Christmas, but Christmas is the reason why Americans go out and spend billions of dollars giving things to each other, emulating Jesus Christ's sacrifice for us on the cross. Then it is important that they're experiencing this. But I don't see them making the connection between their lower stock price and the lower amount of people who frequented their store and what we're doing here. And so I'm drawing this connection to what's happened because I would like to ask you, the listeners, here on this station on what we're doing here at AFA and AFR and Urban to send an email. If you're a Nordstrom's customer and you didn't make purchases there over December, perhaps an email telling them why would help them to understand that we're alive and we're still working and earning money and we still have disposable income with which to make decisions. And we could go back to Nordstrom's en masse and we could change things around in their favor while still getting stuff that we want. If you're a Nordstrom shopper and you have a history of shopping there and you skipped December like I did, an email would be great. Just email them and keep it nice, keep it upbeat. Just wanted to let you know that we skipped shopping at Nordstrom's because you guys don't acknowledge Christmas. If you acknowledge Christmas next Christmas season, we'd love to come back and shop with you. An American Family Radio listener, an American Family Association, a person, whatever you want to sign yourself as. I think it would be good to make the connection for them because they're missing it. Now, this same guest, the former CEO of Toys R Us, went on to make a couple more statements about the huge malls and what's being done with them when people stop shopping in them. And I thought this was fascinating, too, because what I hope is that they won't just turn them all to rubble because it's kind of a waste, but that they'll repurpose the ones that are newer and could be something else, as Google is doing. Here he is talking about it, number 5.
Well, we talk about A malls, B malls, and C malls. The C malls are gone. They need to go out of business. They'll become doctor's offices, insurance offices, places to get your nails filed, that kind of a thing. They're done. Forget about them. The B malls, they're a mixed bag. Some of them will be fantastic mixed-use developments. They need to be repurposed. You can't keep them the way they are, that's for sure. And you saw Google putting office space in there. I think you'll see a lot of residential, apartment buildings along with streetscapes in those kinds of malls. The A malls are still viable, and they will be. And they're putting in great restaurants, theaters, entertainment, and successful concepts which attract, young people, millennials, who have not really been going to the mall.
So he talks about the millennials, but I want to make a point. In addition, this might help with our emails, our little campaign that we're going to do. And I want to make the point that they're always talking about this might help with millennials, and they do need to attract millennials into the A-level malls and develop a habit in them for wanting to go and experience what's in the mall. So that's why we're seeing changes. More restaurants, higher level restaurants, higher quality, kind of a cafe type atmosphere, an outdoor walking experience as well as an indoor one. A lot of changes being made to revamp and bring malls into the current, the way people like to shop. That being said, millennials, sure, that's a great group. That's the future. But there's still, how many millions? 50 million? I don't know how many multiple tens of millions there are of us who aren't millennials, who are decreasing the number of times that we actually frequent a mall. In order to keep us engaged, and we have a higher level of disposable income than millennials do, it would behoove them to figure out what it is that we want to see in malls and try to get that going as well. So again, we're going to adjust our shopping habits, and convenience plays a huge role in that. But it is fun to go into a retail location if you need to buy something, and to do it in a place that you feel is welcoming and acknowledges your existence. And malls used to be so ubiquitous that everyone felt welcome and it was fun for anyone to go. They have to try to recapture that. We have a great call. Okay. Renee in Texas. Thanks for calling the show.
Hi.
Hi.
The thing that I wanted to point out was the liberals have been using a lot of emotion to sell their points of view. And I think the Republicans and the conservatives have been using a lot of facts. And what we need to do is start using more emotion. And when Trump gives his address, they should put a TV behind him with a bunch of pictures that show faces of people who are the people behind the facts, so that when they say 4,000 rapes or something, whatever it was, then people see their faces and they start going, oh, wow, this is much more prevalent than I thought it was, because they're starting to see the faces and starting to feel the emotion of all the facts that we're stating.
Brilliant. I love your idea, because that's not hard to do, right? You're talking about
no, it's not.
the rotating collage of people behind him on a screen, that would be a part of these numbers that I've been quoting. So just like I've been totally writing these numbers, but they're people. Renee, you're talking about the 76,000 dangerous drug offenses, 48,000 assaults, 11,000 weapons offenses, 5,000 sexual assaults, 2,000 kidnappings, and 1,800 homicides. That's too many for him to actually show. But if he had, let's say he had the faces of everyone who was sexually assaulted or everyone who was kidnapped, or maybe the people who were killed because they would not have privacy concerns, the faces of them or their families, anyone who would consent to having their image or their family member's image up there. Imagine, not the hardcore Democrats, Renee, but the regular people out in the world who normally are swayed by the Democrats. That's who you're talking about, right? You're talking about talking to them.
Yeah. Those people, the people that Trump's trying to talk to when he was talking out of the Oval Office.
Yeah.
If they had these things behind him, and, when you see little pictures that are maybe 2 inches by, an inch and a half covering the whole thing, the whole TV screen, and you have to have 8 pages to get through all of them, that tells something.
I love your idea. I think it's a fantastic way to tap into something that the Republicans have not been able to do with charts and graphs. I actually have the emotional response when I see the numbers, but you're right. Most people need more than that. And I'm not sure why we're not doing it, because technologically this is not hard. You're not talking about something that would require a mammoth effort. Renee, thank you. Renee in Texas, thank you so much for calling with your idea. Actually, we'll email it to someone that I know that, obviously, I don't have deep connections in the White House, hence my never having met the president. But I will email Renee's idea, and I will say this is an idea from a caller named Renee in Texas about how you guys could do it. I'm hoping that the president will do the State of the Union from the Senate chambers, since Nancy won't relent the House chambers. The Senate chambers are smaller, but he could still have, since most of the Democrats won't come, he could have the Republican membership there. They wouldn't be able to have a lot of guests, but he could still have the State of the Union there. I also like the idea from a caller yesterday that he go to the southern border and have the State of the Union from the southern border, one of the most dangerous areas he could go to. He might even have border crossings going on, illegal ones in the background while he's talking, which would be interesting to see. I think there's a lot of options for the president on doing the address, and he doesn't have to listen to Nancy Pelosi. She's not his boss. She's not the boss of him, as the kids would say. All right, I want to quickly cover this story. It's an op-ed, but I love it. Trump's re-election chances may be better than you think. His current Economist YouGov polling is approval rating of 45, disapprove 52. And if history's any guide, according to this author, his chances of being reelected are pretty good. He compares the 1994 Bill Clinton approval rating after 2 years in office, which was 40%. So don't believe the hype when they say President Trump's poll numbers are the worst ever. It's just not true. And Newt Gingrich had his contract with America, giving Republicans a majority in the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. Republicans also picked up 8 Senate seats in 1994 and had the majority in both houses. So Republicans thought in 1996 they were going to win. They nominated Bob Dole, a sober but uninspiring Washington fixture. The comeback kid, Clinton, had a Gallup approval rating of 60% by September of 1996. In other words, he was a change artist who saw an opportunity and they ran a bad candidate. The game is afoot for 2020, and President Trump is in it to win it. I don't for one second think he can't pull it off. The question is, what's going to happen with this shutdown? We're going to have fantastic guests for you tomorrow. Burgess Owens and our good friend, Dr. Carol Swain. You don't want to miss that. Have a great night. Good evening, citizens from the Heartland.